2 days before my due date, my husband's ex sent him a frantic text about an emergency. He told me to handle things on my own and disappear for a week. When he finally came back, he was stunned to find his mom at our house with some papers. Oh boy, I read it. I'm in a very complicated situation right now, and any advice would be greatly appreciated. My husband Jeremy, 35M, and I, 32F, have been together for 5 years, married for 2. We met through work, so I didn't know much about his past initially. Eventually, I learned that we both had only had one serious relationship post-college. My ex and I had dated for 4 years, 3 during college and 1 year after, but we broke up due to personal differences and lost touch. We had been broken up for almost 5 years when I met Jeremy. However, Jeremy was still in touch with his ex when we started dating and was actually pretty good friends with her. His ex, let's call her Valerie, was his high school sweetheart. They had been together since they were 16, right through college, and had been broken up for 5 years when he met me. He told me that they had parted ways because she wanted to advance her career with a job in Australia, and he didn't want a long-distance relationship. They tried to make it work for a few months, but eventually mutually agreed to part ways since it was for the best. They were part of the same circle, so they continued to stay in touch and remain friends. I was fine with it until I met his group of friends for the first time after almost 9 months of dating. All of them got together for dinner on New Year's Eve, and Jeremy decided to take me along to introduce me to his friends. Valerie was there as well, which surprised me since I hadn't been prepared to see her. Jeremy had only said nice things about her, so initially, I wasn't insecure. But as soon as I started interacting with her, I realized her energy was very different from what I had expected. Jeremy had made her sound warm and relaxed, but she wasn't like that at all. She made some really cutting remarks about me in front of everyone, and everyone just laughed it off because apparently that was her sense of humor. But I didn't like it one bit. Nobody seemed to get it because she disguised her comments as jokes, like how she remarked that I looked different in person than in pictures, and how she wasn't sure if I was Jeremy's type since he preferred tall blondes and I was neither. But she was, and everybody laughed since they thought she was just joking. She also made some remarks about how I was her successor, so she felt like she owed it to me to give me some training on how to keep Jeremy happy. These remarks were still somewhat harmless, and I was willing to look past them, thinking she might just have a very weird sense of humor. But then, while we were drinking, she toasted to the fact that Jeremy had finally moved on and how happy she was for him. I thought that was nice until she added that had it not been for her decision to move to Australia, I probably wouldn't even be there with them. Thankfully, nobody laughed because it was awkward, but she quickly started laughing at her own comment, forcing everyone to chuckle to move past it. It wasn't lost on me that she was still possessive about Jeremy. Once we got back home, I told him I didn't want her speaking to me again if he wanted to be with me. I told him I was uncomfortable with his friendship with her since she was clearly not over him and had been rude to me the entire evening. I had put up with her respectfully once, but I wasn't going to do it again. I was very clear about my boundaries because even in my earlier relationships, I had to deal with similar issues. Thankfully, Jeremy seemed to understand where I was coming from. He told me he also found her behavior strange and decided he would cut her out of his life because he didn't want her causing issues in our relationship. After that incident, I never heard him mention Valerie or speak to her again. He told me he had blocked her, so I was content with that explanation. I met his friends several times after that, and they never brought up Valerie with me, probably because Jeremy had told them I didn't like her. Things had been going smoothly until last week. I was pregnant, and last Sunday was my due date. It's Thursday now, and Jeremy left to attend to Valerie because she had some emergency and needed him by her side. He left 2 days before my due date and came back last night. We had a massive argument about it because I had assumed he had blocked Valerie and wasn't in touch with her. He told me he had indeed blocked her, but she had used a different number to contact him and was pretty desperate. Apparently, she had been diagnosed with stage 2 brain cancer and really needed someone to be there for her. I was furious with him. How could he leave me alone when I was so heavily pregnant? I understood that it was difficult for him to accept that someone he used to be close to might not make it, but it wasn't as if she was going to pass away immediately. He could have gone the next day after being there for me during the labor and seeing his child born, but as soon as he got the news, he had to leave immediately. I tried to explain how ridiculous it was for him to even consider leaving me in this condition, but he insisted he'd be back before I went into labor, saying due dates aren't accurate and I might still have another week. He told me to just deal with it until he returned. then left for the airport without even finishing our conversation. He knew I didn't have my family here. My parents lived in Ua, and I was completely relying on him. After he left for the airport, I tried calling him several times, but his phone was switched off. Desperate and upset, I called my mother-in-law, who had always been nice to me. Through tears, I explained the situation, and she came right over, trying to call him as well. But of course, his phone remained off. She comforted me and stayed with me all day because I was extremely upset and kept crying, with the pregnancy hormones amplifying my emotions. We couldn't reach Jeremy until the next day, and even then, he didn't answer our calls. He only sent us both a text saying he would be back soon, hopefully before the baby was born. He apologized and said he would accept any punishment I deemed fit when he returned. But for now, he had to be there for an old friend who had no family in Australia and whose parents couldn't fly out due to her father's illness. She was counting on him to help her process this news, and he just had to be there. His explanation did nothing to calm me and only made me angrier. He thought it was more important to be there for an old friend than for his pregnant wife. A cancer diagnosis is serious, but what could he do about it? Cure her instantly? No, he should have stayed with me. My mother-in-law agreed and asked me bluntly if I wanted to leave him. Without much thought, I said yes. She spoke to her lawyer and had him draw up divorce papers and an agreement to terminate Jeremy's parental rights. She told me that if he came back before the due date, I could decide whether to file for divorce or talk to him first. If he didn't make it back in time, it would be clear what I had to do. Having raised Jeremy as a single parent, she understood the struggle and was determined to ensure I wouldn't go through the same thing. She promised Jeremy would pay child support, unlike his father, who abandoned them. She stayed with me throughout the week, offering support. For the next few days, neither of us contacted Jeremy. On Monday, I went into labor. My mother-in-law tried calling Jeremy to let him know, but he didn't pick up. She decided not to text him because there was no point. Fortunately, my parents had flown in the day before, so they were there for me. Still, I felt Jeremy's absence acutely. I made up my mind that no matter what happened when he came back, I would never see him the same way again. 3 hours after giving birth, I filled out the paperwork for the divorce and told the lawyer to file it on my behalf. One of my friends had advised me that if I wanted to be happy and be a good mother to my child, I had to take care of myself first. I couldn't do that with a man who prioritized his obligations to Valerie over me. After our daughter was born, I didn't even call Jeremy. My mother-in-law, my parents, and I stayed at home together. My parents were supposed to leave tomorrow, so it would just be me and my mother-in-law. I told them all about my decision to leave him because he hadn't tried to contact me despite promising to be back before the due date. He had spent a week with Valerie instead. Last night, Jeremy came home late. I opened the door and he hugged me, but I shook him off and said I wanted nothing to do with him. Hearing the doorbell and the commotion, my mother-in-law walked into the room with the papers and threw them in his face. She demanded he leave immediately. She didn't care where he spent the night. She wanted him out of the house because I needed peace and quiet after giving birth. She also told him I had already filled out the divorce paperwork and needed him to complete the paperwork to terminate his parental rights. Jeremy was shocked and speechless for a few minutes. I left the room because I was still weak and needed to recover. Seeing him had weakened my resolve. Then I heard yelling and realized Jeremy was fighting with his mother. I stayed out of it, comforting my daughter. After a few minutes, Jeremy started calling my name, demanding to see his daughter, claiming I owed him that much. That infuriated me. I put my daughter in her crib and confronted him. I told him I owed him nothing. He had chosen not to be there for me during my pregnancy and the birth of our child, leaving me alone. I was lucky my mother-in-law was there for me, but I owed him nothing. I told him to leave and that we could discuss this later in the morning. He left with tears in his eyes, trying to talk to me one last time, but I told him to go. We were tired and went to sleep. This morning he showed up again. I finally told him it was over. It had been over the moment he left to be with Valerie. There was nothing he could say to change my mind. My mother-in-law was in the room, but I told her I wanted to have this conversation with him myself. Jeremy started crying and begging. My mother-in-law had to leave the house with the baby so our daughter wouldn't hear him. He kept insisting he had only gone because Valerie begged him, claiming she was on her deathbed. He said he stayed because she was alone and needed comfort, and it was purely platonic. But I wasn't there, so I didn't know what had happened. I told him it didn't matter anymore and I wanted him to leave. Then he pleaded, saying even if I divorced him, it was too harsh to take away his chance of being a father. He wanted me to reconsider or he would fight for custody. He knew it was unlikely he would get custody since he hadn't been there for the birth, and we could use that against him. Plus, our newborn daughter needed me more than her father. He begged for one chance because, despite everything, he really wanted a family. Eventually, Jeremy did leave but asked me to think it over. Now, I'm not so sure what to do. This is a huge decision involving people's lives, so I want to be certain before moving forward. Am I the asshole for divorcing my husband and asking him to terminate his parental rights over our daughter because he skipped her birth to be with his ex, who claimed to be on her deathbed? Update: I've made up my mind and am going through with the divorce. I'm still contemplating whether I want full custody or not. Jeremy has shown up at the house every day to apologize and literally beg for forgiveness. It's getting harder to turn him away, but I know I have to. Thankfully, my mother-in-law has been incredibly supportive and is helping me take care of the baby. My parents had to fly back home, but my mother-in-law has moved in with me long-term to provide the help I need. I told her that even if I decide against giving Jeremy full or partial custody, she will always be welcome to visit her granddaughter. I asked my mother-in-law for her opinion on the custody situation, but she left the decision to me, confident that I'll make the right choice for both of us, just like I did with the divorce. I'm still struggling with this decision, and it hasn't gotten any easier because Jeremy keeps showing up. Every time he comes, I feel like taking him back and forgiving him, but I can't, not after everything I've been through. Valerie has always been a sore spot for me, and he ignored that even when I was pregnant with his baby. Honestly, I don't know if they have been in touch or if something was going on between them recently. I can't trust anything he says anymore. His apologies are always the same. He insists nothing happened. It was all platonic, and he was just taking care of her because she claimed to be on her deathbed. Every time, I have to tell him the same thing back. It doesn't matter anymore because I've made up my mind and am leaving him. It's sad, but that's just how it is. Update 2. A few days ago, I posted an update about deciding to go through with the divorce but being unsure about filing for full custody of my daughter. Now, I think I know what to do. For almost 5 days straight, Jeremy showed up daily to apologize and try to win me back. Then, he suddenly stopped. I found it strange but felt relieved, thinking I could finally think clearly. However, after he stopped coming, I started receiving texts from people telling me that what I was doing was incredibly wrong and immoral, and they never expected me to act like this. His friends began bombarding me with messages, not just his usual group but every single person who went to school or college with him. It felt like he set up a template for them to send, like a petition. They sent emails and messages trying to convince me to cancel the divorce. At first, I blocked people left and right, but then they started making fake accounts to send the same messages. There are only so many people you can block. Besides, I'm dealing with emotional trauma, processing everything, and trying to be there for my newborn daughter. This is the last thing I needed. If Jeremy really cared about me, he wouldn't be putting me through all of this at such a delicate stage of my life. It's obvious he only cares about himself. I don't think I have to worry about my daughter's custody anymore. I'm going to file for full custody, and that's final. He still has the papers and can sign his rights away if he chooses. I've spoken to my lawyer, and this is happening. The messages I've been receiving are hurtful, and I know for a fact that he has written the template and instructed his friends to send it to me. It reflects his beliefs more than anything else. If this is how he views me, we don't need to be together at all. The messages included a line saying, "We never expected you to be the kind of person who would use their child as a pawn to punish their partner and play mind games like this." Is he for real? Does he seriously think I'm using our daughter to punish him for what he did? He clearly doesn't understand how marriages or children work. That line hurt me deeply and solidified my decision. When I showed the messages to my mother-in-law, she was very upset and wanted to contact him and tell him off. I asked her not to because it wasn't worth it. Confronting him would only lead to him denying any involvement, even though it's clear all his friends are sending the same type of messages. I don't understand why he involved his friends in this. It's not like I'm going to read their messages and instantly stop what I'm doing. Their opinions don't matter to me because they aren't my friends. I've never been close to any of them, so they can think whatever they want about me. I don't care. I guess he thought if enough people started texting me, I'd give in to the pressure, but he doesn't know me at all. I'm not the kind of person who bends to pressure. I did change my mind when he showed up every day begging for forgiveness. I knew letting him back into my life would not be good for any of us, especially our daughter. I might have felt terrible about it, but I still went through with it because I don't bend easily. After being with me for so long, he should have an idea of what kind of person I am. But it's clear he doesn't. It's becoming clearer every day that I'm doing the right thing by leaving him. Even if every single person he knows starts texting me, I won't change my mind. In fact, this situation has only strengthened my resolve. As long as the people I love are on my side, I don't have to worry about any of this. Update 3. The legal proceedings for the divorce and the custody agreement will commence in a couple of days. Jeremy has decided not to contest the divorce but is demanding at least partial custody of our daughter. We're going to see how that works out. I'm open to the idea because I'm not inherently evil, but I don't want to implement shared custody until our daughter is at least a couple of years old. That's what we're going to negotiate, and I'm very happy I've made this decision for myself. Now that it's finally happening and hitting me how real all of this is, I thought I would be scared, but I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. I think some of this confidence might be because of a message I received from Valerie yesterday. She told me that she really didn't want to be a homewrecker but needed somebody by her side since her parents wouldn't be there for her. Jeremy was the only person she could think of. She also mentioned that over the past couple of years she had tried to contact him several times and he had always turned her down, saying I wouldn't approve of it. But she knew that her oldest friend in the world would always be there for her, especially if she was sick, which is why she contacted him. She apologized for the trouble this had stirred up in my marriage, but thought I should let him retain his individuality instead of being so controlling. So, I was right that he hadn't blocked her at all, and they had stayed in touch, maybe not in the way I thought. But they did at least speak to each other. The worst part was that she also told me they had shared a moment when they were together and ended up kissing for a couple of minutes. But after that, Jeremy had drawn away from her, saying he couldn't do this, especially while his wife was with his child. She told me that he had not let the kiss last more than a couple of minutes, and that was how loyal he was to me, as if that was supposed to make a difference. It was ridiculous, but yes, I was right about everything. Now, getting the divorce and custody on my terms should be a cakewalk. I've spoken to my lawyer, and we've tweaked our petition to demand slightly more of everything because I feel I deserve it since I've been cheated on. I'm feeling very confident about what I'm doing and know that things are going to work out.